How much does the Road Accident Fund lose every year in opportunistic loss of income claims? We speak to actuary and damages expert Gregory Whittaker.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning to you all, to your listeners and viewers.
What does your research show in terms of figures, Gregory?
So what we looked at was just the we did a claims analysis. We obtained data from the Road Accident Fund to just see what's the composition of the claims, and we were able to tease out what the value of loss of income claims were for non-serious injuries. And if we liken that to the current day value that's been paid out, so in the financial year ending March 2023, the Road Accident Fund paid out 22 billion rand for loss of income claims. And of that, we estimate around 3 billion is in respect of non-serious injury.
Why are these claims still legally possible?
So they are still possible. The reason being is that there was an amendment to the Road Accident Fund Act in 2008. And what that did is that it prevented general damages claims. So general damages claims are basically it's sort of non-economic damages. I often refer to it as non-economic damages. So it's a payment for things like pain and suffering and so on. So it's and they did away with general damages claims for non-serious injuries. And when I refer to a non-serious injury, it's basically referring to someone who's got less than a 30% whole person impairment, or you can still have the act allows you to have less than a 30% whole person impairment, but then there's something that's called the narrative test, which can then put you into the category of a serious injury. So, but if you just look at it just purely on the basis of those who have less than a 30% whole person impairment, they no longer received a claim for general damages. So that's things like whiplash and so on. Before 2008, there used to be payments for general damages for those sorts of things, and that generally used to be the only payment that was made. What happened is when the Act was amended and it did away with a payment for general damages for non-serious injuries, there wasn't a corresponding adjustment for loss of earnings. So the emphasis seems to have shifted to claims for loss of earnings. So in other words, claims that were previously just settled on the basis of a fairly low payment for general damages is now shifted to higher claims for loss of earnings. So it is permissible under the Act as it stands, but my feeling is that the compensation, the method that's used to calculate these things, and the general values that you see out of the claims data point to the compensation being excessive.
See, how else is the system being abused?
Well, look, I think there's a number of aspects when it comes to just the calculations. There's a lot of debate around the use of industrial psychologists in doing earnings projections and so on. So there was actually recently mentioned by the CEO of the Road Accident Fund where he mentioned that sort of 90% of children's claimants are projected to get a degree, whereas in reality only sort of like I think 7% of the population has a degree. So so there are those sort of aspects where a lot of experts, your core duty is really to the court and not to your client. So you ought to come up with an objective analysis of what a career progression would be, for example, for a child that's injured in an accident. So my paper actually does speak to that as well in terms of children's claims. So South Africa is a little bit different. I mean, we did a comparison with the BRICS countries, and South Africa is quite a bit different in terms of how they determine a loss of earnings for a child who's injured in an accident. So if you look at countries like China and India, you'll find that they actually base the compensation on sort of an average national earnings, and they leave it at that. In South Africa, they'll investigate your family history and all sorts of other things, and then they'll come up with projections of your earnings into the future. based on various scenarios, such as having a degree and so on. And so the compensation is not terribly consistent when it comes to determining losses for children. So we're quite different compared to the other BRICS countries in that regard.
So as a result, how do these compensation payouts compare to those made in terms of the Occupational Injuries Act?
Yeah, so that's something we looked at. So, for example, if you're looking at somebody who's so the CWEDA, basically they have a defined benefit for determining loss of earnings for non-serious injuries. So for somebody who's less than 30% disabled, they've got a set formula, and it's basically it's just based on a multiple of your earnings, and it's based on your percentage whole person impairment. So it's just a once-off lump sum. And in terms of that regime, I mean, the maximum payment that you can get for a non-serious injury is of the order of 300,000 rand, and that's if you're 30% whole person impaired. Whereas with the road accident fund, I mean, we found one claim where the payout was about 25 times the maximum under CWEDA. So I think in that case, the person got about 7.5 million rand for a non-serious injury for loss of earnings. So I think the advantage of the CWEDA system is just more administratively expedient. So if you look at how claims are dealt with at the moment and under the Act, there's often like quite a few experts that are briefed and involved. So you normally have at least the same number of core experts for a non-serious injury as for a serious injury. So you normally have things like occupational therapists, orthopedic surgeons, industrial psychologists, and so on. It doesn't matter whether the person is seriously injured or not seriously injured. You normally have the similar core experts involved, and then calculations are made based on those reports. But so it's almost the same expense for sometimes like a whiplash injury. So one needs to perhaps look at a system where there is less, it's less burden. It's less of a burden in terms of getting and so matter shouldn't even go to court. I mean, it should just be a fairly routine administrative exercise to determine what the loss of income should be. So there's a big mismatch. I mean, for exactly the same injury, for example, if you lose a toe at the workplace or in a road accident fund claim, the compensation is calculated completely differently. Okay.
Now, all these huge claims, are being paid out against the background of RAF. RAF's dire financial position. How bad is it at the moment?
Well, look, there has the National Treasury is had to rely on their estimate of the unfunded liability, which is around about 350 billion rand. I do emphasize in the research as well is that obviously the primary cause of the issue is our high rate of accidents in South Africa. So I think like at the source we have a problem on our roads. There needs to obviously be far more resources directed at actually curing the problem, which is high rate of accidents. Once you solve that, then obviously you've got fewer claims and everything else. There's a knock-on effect. But this was so. I absolutely acknowledge that. But within that context, I mean, if you're looking at what I believe is fairly wasteful in many instances is payments for non-serious injuries.
Now, of all the research you have done, Gregory, what are your recommendations?
So I do think an important thing is just to align the Act in terms of where we have no payment for general damages for non-serious injury. There needs to be some alignment with the loss of income. So not necessarily doing away with the loss of income altogether for non-serious injury, but I think there needs to be a more expedient system in terms of assessing the matters and making smaller payments than what are currently being made. And then I also think we need to shift to a system. We've got a number of different personal injury systems in the country where, you've got if you're injured on the workplace, you're covered by the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act. I've written extensively also about the medical malpractice problem in South Africa, and there's a lot of issues around the carbon compensation there as well. So I think, and also then you've got like a statutory act like the RAF. So I think there's a lot of things that can be aligned in terms of a more standardized system of compensation across all of these spheres. And another thing that there's also a major surge in claims, for example, against the South African Police Service, the civil claims and so on. So there's a number of fronts where one needs to try and just have sort of perhaps what I suggested is just sort of a central body where one can, make sure all of these things are aligned.
That was actuary and damages expert Gregory Whittaker speaking to BizNews. I am Chris Steyn. Thank you, Gregory.